cardiologist's office called at 10:47 on a Tuesday morning to say my appointment had been rescheduled. The doctor had a family emergency. Could I come in that afternoon instead of Thursday? I said yes without thinking twice. 2 hours later, I was back on I-91 heading north. And that's when everything I thought I knew about my own family began to fall apart. I should have been in Hartford until Thursday evening. That was the plan. My daughter knew it. Her husband knew it. I'd told them both the week before when I stopped by their place to drop off some tomatoes from my garden. I grow more than I can ever eat alone. Always have. "Dad, you're going to be gone until Thursday?" my daughter had asked, barely looking up from her phone. "Yeah, just a routine follow-up," I told her. "Nothing exciting, nothing exciting." I still think about that conversation. My name is Walter. No, wait, let me start over because that's not how I think of myself anymore. I'm just a man who worked 41 years as an electrician in the same county, raised 2 kids after my wife Barbara passed from ovarian cancer in 2009, and spent the last 6 years trying to figure out what retirement was supposed to feel like. I bought the house in 1987, paid it off in 2011. That house is the only thing I've ever truly owned outright. The only thing that ever felt completely mine. Barbara picked the wallpaper in the kitchen. Pale yellow with small white flowers. Every contractor who's worked in that house since she died has offered to replace it. I always say no. My daughter Allison is 42. She married her husband Derek 9 years ago. No, wait, I cannot use Derek. Let me think of him differently. Her husband. I'll call him what I called him in my head. Most of those 9 years, my son-in-law. Because that's the only name that matters in this story. He'd been out of steady work for about 14 months when this happened. Lost his project manager job at a mid-sized construction company after they restructured. He had unemployment coming in, but it wasn't covering what they spent. Allison worked part-time as a dental hygienist. Good job, decent pay, but they had a mortgage on a house they'd bought in 2021 near the top of the market, 2 car payments, and a vacation they'd put on a card they hadn't paid down since. I knew some of this. I didn't know all of it. What I did know was that 2 months before that Tuesday, my son-in-law had come to me asking for help. He sat at my kitchen table, Barbara's table, the one with the scratch on the corner where my son knocked at moving and college furniture, and he told me they were about 4 months behind on their second mortgage. Not the main one, a home equity line they'd opened to redo their master bath and then kept drawing on. He needed $22,000 to keep the bank from accelerating the loan. He looked at the table when he talked, not at me. I told him I needed to think about it. That was honest. I wasn't a man with $22,000 sitting in checking. I had it in savings, had worked my whole life to have a cushion like that, but it wasn't money I could hand over without feeling the weight of it. I told him I'd let him know by the end of the week. I let him know by Wednesday. I said yes. I said I would wire the money from my savings account. I said I didn't need to be paid back immediately. We could work out something reasonable. I was not asking for interest. I was not asking for a contract. He was my daughter's husband. That meant something to me. We agreed I'd transfer the funds on Friday. This was a Thursday conversation. On Friday morning, my cardiologist's office called. New appointment, that afternoon, not Thursday. I came home early. I pulled off exit 14 a little after 2 in the afternoon, made the left onto Birch Creek Road, and saw the truck before I even turned into my driveway. A white box truck, one of those medium-duty rentals, maybe 16 feet, backed up across my lawn with the rear doors hanging open. I slowed down before I turned in. I didn't know what I was looking at yet, but something in my chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with my heart condition. I parked behind the truck and got out. The first thing I noticed was my workbench, my father's workbench, the one he built in 1962 from Douglas fir and handed down to me when he moved into assisted living 15 years ago. It was sitting in the bed of that truck, pushed up against the right wall, still with his initials scratched into the corner leg. E.M. Edmund Mills, my father's initials. The second thing I noticed was my toolboxes, both of them. The big red snap-on chest I'd bought in 1994, $1,200 back then, which was a month's wages, and the smaller Craftsman stack I kept the specialty tools in, both in the truck. The third thing I noticed was my son-in-law, coming out of my side door carrying a cardboard box with what looked like my old Craftsman radio stacked inside. He stopped when he saw me. We looked at each other across about 30 feet of driveway, and I can tell you exactly what I felt in that moment. Nothing. Not anger yet. Not shock, exactly. Just a terrible, quiet stillness, like when you're up on a ladder and you feel it start to shift and your whole body goes cold and calm before you even have time to be scared. "What is this?" I said. He put the box down on the tailgate. He didn't drop it. He set it down carefully, like it still mattered how the box was handled. Something about that detail made me angrier than almost anything else. "Dad," he said. He called me Dad. 9 years, he'd always called me that, and I'd always liked it. That day it landed differently. "I thought your appointment was Thursday." "I know you did," I said. "What is this?" Allison came out from behind the truck then. She'd been around the other side. I hadn't seen her. She was wearing old clothes, the kind you wear when you're moving things, and her hair was pulled back, and she looked at me the way my kids used to look at me when they were small and had done something they knew was wrong. That look. 42 years old, and she still had that exact look. "Dad," she started. "Don't," I said. That's all I said. I walked to the back of the truck and looked inside. My workbench. My toolboxes. 3 wooden shelving units from the garage I'd built in the 90s. My table saw. A saw stop, bought used 3 years ago for $800. The one I'd used to make picture frames for Barbara's photos after she died. A box I could see from the open flap was full of hand tools, levels, squares, my grandfather's wood planes that I'd had refettled and hadn't used in years but had always planned to again. A cardboard box with Barbara's good dishes, the ones we'd gotten as a wedding gift in 1981 and used every Thanksgiving for 27 years. Those dishes. I turned around and looked at my son-in-law. "How long have you been planning this?" I said. He opened his mouth and closed it. He looked at Allison. She looked at the ground. "We're behind," he finally said. I didn't know what else to do. "You were going to take my father's workbench," I said. "His workbench? To do what? Sell it? There's a place in Meriden that buys used tools," he said. "Estate sales kind of stuff." "I figured I'd be in Hartford until Thursday," I said. "We were going to put it back," Allison said. Her voice cracked on the last word. "We were just going to borrow it, sell some things, pay down the line, and then..." "Then what?" I said. "Buy back your grandfather's things? Buy back my table saw?" She didn't answer that. I walked past them and into the garage. 3 of the wall hooks were empty where tools had been hanging. The shelving along the back wall was stripped. They hadn't touched the deep freezer or the riding mower. Probably too heavy. But the workbench space was just an empty floor with 4 ghost squares in the dust where it had stood for 30 years. I stood there for a long time. I don't know how long. I could hear them outside talking to each other in low voices. I couldn't make out words. There's something about standing in a space where something is missing that hits you differently than seeing the something itself gone. The absence has a shape. That empty corner had a shape. My father had built that bench the year I was born. He'd used it for 30 years before me. I'd used it for another 30. My son had learned to use a hand plane on that bench. I had planned. This is the part that I kept coming back to. I had planned to teach my grandchildren on that bench someday. Allison and her husband didn't have children yet, but I'd always figured someday. I'd always figured I'd still be in that garage and there'd be a kid who wanted to learn to make something and I'd show them. I went back outside. "I want everything off the truck," I said. "Right now. Everything goes back exactly where it was." Dad, my son-in-law started. I'm not talking to you yet, I said. I was surprised by how steady my voice was. Allison, everything off the truck. You know where it all goes. She nodded. She was crying quietly. She went to the truck and started to climb in, and my son-in-law followed her, and the two of them started moving things back. I stood in the driveway and watched. I didn't help. I didn't say anything. I watched every single item come back off that truck and go back to where it belonged, including Barbara's dishes, including the hand planes, including my father's workbench, which took both of them and 20 minutes, and they scraped the legs slightly on the driveway edge, and I had to close my eyes for a second when that happened. When the truck was empty, my son-in-law stood at the tailgate with his hands at his sides. "Are you going to call the police?" he said. I thought about that. I want to be honest about what I thought, because I've told this story to a few people since, and some of them think I was too easy and some think I wasn't easy enough, and I want you to understand the actual thought I had in that driveway. I thought about my daughter. I thought about what it would mean for her if I called the police on her husband. I thought about the look on her face when she'd said we were going to put it back, and whether she had actually believed that when she said it, or whether she'd been telling herself a story to get through the afternoon. I thought about the $22,000 I had agreed to wire that morning and hadn't yet. "Go home," I said. "I'll call you when I'm ready to talk." My son-in-law nodded. He got in the truck cab and my daughter got in the passenger side, and they drove away, and I stood in my driveway until I couldn't hear the truck anymore. Then I went inside and sat at Barbara's kitchen table and looked at the pale yellow wallpaper for a very long time. I didn't call my son the same day. I didn't call anyone. I made a sandwich. I didn't eat. And I watched the evening news without hearing it, and I went to bed at 9 o'clock. I lay in the dark and I thought about my father. I thought about him driving that workbench to my house in his pickup truck the winter before he moved to Sunrise Gardens on Route 44. He'd been 81. He'd worn his good flannel shirt, the dark green one, like it was an occasion. We'd carried the bench in together and set it in the garage, and he'd run his hand along the surface and said, "She's still true," meaning the surface was still flat, still level after 50 years. A good bench stays true. I called Allison the next morning at 8. She answered on the first ring. "I need you to come over," I said, "without him." She was there by 9:30. We sat at the kitchen table. She'd been crying before she arrived. I could tell from her face. She had a paper cup of coffee from somewhere, and she held it with both hands and looked at me, and I looked at her, and neither of us said anything for a minute. "How long has it actually been this bad?" I said. She let out a breath. "Since before he lost the job." "But it got worse, much worse." "How much debt?" She told me. I won't put all the numbers here because some of them aren't only her story to tell. But the total was worse than $22,000. It was considerably worse. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said. "I was embarrassed," she said. "He was embarrassed," she said. "He was embarrassed. He kept saying he was going to fix it. He had a lead on a job, then the lead fell through. He had another one, then that one. I think he started believing that if he could just solve it before you found out, it would be like it never happened. And instead, he decided to solve it by stealing from me," I said. She flinched at that word. "I used it on purpose. I didn't want either of us calling it anything softer than what it was." "I should have stopped it," she said. "I helped load the truck. I knew what we were doing." "Yes," I said, "you did." We sat with that for a moment. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I haven't decided," I said. "But I need you to understand something first. What was in that truck wasn't just money. Your grandfather's bench has been in this family since 1962. Barbara's dishes were a wedding gift from my mother. These are not things with replacement value. Do you understand that?" "Yes," she said. Her voice was barely audible. "And I need you to understand that I was going to wire $22,000 that morning. That morning. I had not cancelled the transfer yet. I was going to give you that money, and you were loading my truck." She put her face in her hands. I let her sit that way. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was trying to make sure the weight of it landed where it belonged. When she looked up again, I told her what I'd decided. The $22,000 was off the table, not because I was punishing her, but because money flowing freely to a household in this kind of trouble doesn't fix the trouble. It covers it up long enough to grow. I told her that. What I would do instead, I would pay 3 months of their primary mortgage directly to the lender, not to them, to the bank. I'd call on Monday, give them my card, and the next 3 payments would come from me. That bought them time without cash they could spend on anything else. I told her that this was not a gift, it was a loan, and I would put it in writing, and they would pay it back at $300 a month starting in 6 months. 0 interest because I was her father and not a bank, but the paperwork would exist. Her husband would need to call a non-profit credit counselor. I'd already looked one up, a HUD-approved agency in our area that did free consultations. And he would need to show me he'd made the appointment before I made the first mortgage payment. That was the condition. And the tool sales. If they needed to liquidate something to get liquid cash quickly, I would sit down with them and help them figure out what could go. Not from my garage, from their house. There is always something. People in financial trouble almost always have things they're holding onto that they don't need and won't miss the way they think they will. I'd been through it myself 30 years ago, a different kind of tight spot. I knew how to look at a household and find the margin. Allison listened to all of this without interrupting. When I finished, she asked if I was going to the police. No, I said, but I want to say something, and I want you to hear it clearly. If anything goes missing from this house again, anything at all, doesn't matter how small, doesn't matter the reason, I will call. And it won't matter what it costs you or your husband. Are we clear? Yes, she said. Good. Now tell him to come in. She looked startled. He's outside. I saw his car on the street when you pulled up, I said. Tell him to come in. She got up and went to the door and opened it and called his name, and 60 seconds later he was standing in my kitchen doorway looking like a man who'd been waiting outside in a car for 2 hours working up to the worst conversation of his life. Which, I suppose, he was. He sat down across from me. I looked at him for a moment. I'm not going to say everything twice, I said. Allison will tell you what we discussed. I have one thing to say to you directly, and then we're going to move on because I am 67 years old and I don't have the energy to stay angry for years at a time. He nodded. You sat at this table 2 months ago, I said. You looked me in the eye. You told me about the second mortgage. You asked for help. And I said yes. I said yes, and then you went home and started making other plans. That tells me something about where you are right now. How panicked you are, how foreign you feel. I understand desperation. I have been desperate before, but I need you to hear this. The moment you backed that truck up to my garage, you stopped being a man who made a mistake and became a man who made a choice. Those are different things. He was looking at the table. Look at me, I said. He looked up. I need to know if you understand that, I said. Not if you're sorry. I can see you're sorry. I need to know if you understand what you chose. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Yes, sir. I do. All right, I said. I pushed the notepad across the table with the credit counselor's information on it. His appointment with them needed to happen by Friday. After that, we would talk about the loan structure and I would call the mortgage company. He picked up the notepad. He looked at it. He nodded. Thank you, he said. The words came out like they cost him something. Don't thank me yet, I said. Do what you said you'd do. They left around noon. I stood on the porch and watched them back out of the driveway, and then I went into the garage. The workbench was back in its corner. The surface had a new scuff on the left side near the vise where it had been set down wrong when they carried it back in. I looked at that scuff for a while. Then I went and got some 220 grit sandpaper, and I sanded it smooth, and I rubbed a little linseed oil into it the way my father had shown me. When I was done, I ran my hand across the surface. She was still true. That was 8 months ago now. My son-in-law made the appointment with the credit counselor. I asked to see the confirmation email, and he sent it to me without argument. The 3 mortgage payments went through. He found steady work in January, a site supervisor role with a company that does commercial retrofits, decent salary, benefits. The first $300 came in by Venmo in February with a note that just said, "First one." The second came in March. The third was last week. Allison calls on Sundays now. She didn't always before all this. We talk about nothing much. Her work, my garden, a show she's watching, the tomatoes I'm starting from seed again this year. She never brings up what happened, and neither do I. Some things don't need to be revisited. Some things just need to be carried forward differently. I still think about that afternoon, though. I think about standing in the garage looking at the empty corner where the workbench had been, that ghost square in the dust. I think about what I would have come home to on Thursday if the appointment had stayed on schedule. The truck gone, the tools gone, a plausible story ready and waiting, and me handing over $22,000 on top of it. I think about how close I came to never knowing. My father built that bench 62 years ago from lumber he paid for himself, worked with his own hands, in a garage not unlike mine. He passed it to me because that's what you do with things that matter. You pass them forward. You don't sell them in a panic. You don't load them onto a rental truck while your father is 2 hours away at a cardiologist's appointment. You keep them. You take care of them. And when the surface gets scuffed, you sand it smooth and oil it and run your hand across it. And you make sure she's still true. Because some things, if you're careful enough, can be.